Update 0.10.9 Submarines Next Steps. Details on further steps of submarine testing. Submarines have come a long way. From the first announcement in the summer of 2019, 3 tests, a temporary submarine battles battle type on the left server, on the live server. I remember submarine battles. And again, a test on a separate server in October 2020. During this time, we collected a lot of feedback and statistics based on which improvements were made to practically all mechanics. They were. Oxygen was replaced with battery charge and later with dive capacity. Which this was similar to oxygen in a way, but making this more generic does allow, the lose dive capacity, the timer or whatever, at a rapid rate, as opposed to being detected by oxygen. I guess everybody just starts breathing really heavy, and the oxygen gets burned up. We're detected, shit! So making this kind of an arbitrary name fits a little better for the counterplay options. We updated sonar and hydrophone. Yeah, hydrophone is definitely different. Sonar's definitely different. We added anti-sub-warfare aircraft for cruisers and battleships. The cruisers isn't in yet. I guess that's in 10.9. I guess it's in the next patch. In battleships. Submersion mechanics were revamped, yeah. Commander skills for playing and countering submarines were added. Most maps received a detailed underwater world. Submarines have now been participating in ranked and cooperative battles for almost 2 months. We are grateful to you for the battles played and providing the feedback that helped shape the next steps in the development of submarines. Changes to submarine gameplay. Based on your feedback and collected statistics from the current submarine test phase, we have planned a number of changes and improvements to the gameplay. In Update 0.10.9, we will add anti-sub warfare to most battleships and cruisers from Tier 5 to 10. I just woke up, so evidently I can't speak. Exceptions will be Dutch cruisers and hybrid ships, because they already have planes. This change, in addition to allowing all classes to counter submarines while underwater, also removes some of the counter submarine burdens from destroyers. Yeah. A class that is already in the line of fire and often focused on capturing points. With the help of anti-submarine aircraft, it will be easier to deal with submarines, enabling you to strike at them from a distance and choosing the affected area without forcing a destroyer to change course and head towards the submarine to drop its depth charges. Yeah, which, I mean, if you think about it in a way, the anti-sub aircraft is kind of similar to throwing shells downrange at a target. It's a target under the water, but it's still throwing shells downrange at a target, which you'd do against the surface ship anyway. So it amounts to chip damage. It doesn't often amount to like one single depth charge just rips you in half. Hey, Camille. So chip damage is chip damage, shell striking, etc. So it's really not that different, although it can certainly feel burdensome. Other changes: torpedoes will now be launched one by one. The gameplay will become more dynamic, and this change will give you more control over the torpedoes fired. And I believe this is actually going to help the homing characteristics of the torpedoes, especially in anti-sub fights. Because right now, when you've got the two torpedoes, there's a homing section which is pulled from the center, which means you can angle to the torpedoes and have them whiz by. However, if they're fired independently and the homing point is actually centered on the torpedo, well then theoretically you could strike bow end targets in a way that you would not otherwise be able to do that currently. So that might actually be an increase in power to the torpedoes. Also, the way you could space them out could be an increase in power. But that hasn't been, tested yet. And I guess worst case, they might alter the reload or alter, maybe like instead of having 4 torpedoes in the front, it might have 3 kind of thing, just because it's more likely to land more torps, maybe? I don't know. Anyway, changes to torpedo characteristics. German submarines were worse at dealing damage to enemies because they had shorter range. To balance submarines in this regard, we've improved maximum damage and chance to cause flooding of German submarine torpedoes. Torpedo tubes on German submarines are primarily located on the bow, which helps them when attacking targets at long range. To shift gameplay on German submarines more toward long-range engagements, we've improved their torpedo range. On the other hand, American submarines can be quite effective at medium and short distances, since they have torpedo tubes located in the bow and the stern. Therefore, to encourage American subs toward this style of engagement, the range of their torpedoes has been reduced. Actually, I guess that kind of flips the archetype on its head a little bit. I mean, having the torpedoes in the bow kind of makes the German submarines attack submarines. Yeah, they want to go in and kill. It's a little frustrating, however, when running a German sub and you don't have enough to guarantee a kill on the enemy submarine. Because again, the homing point, whatever, the torpedoes could whiz by. It takes 2, possibly 3 torpedoes to sink an enemy sub. And if you only have, say, 4, well, then you flood your 2, or you flood one set of them. The damage con gets used to damage con off a ping. And theoretically, at best, you get 2 torps, which is not enough to kill. So it extends the length of the engagement, which is okay. But it can be frustrating because if the American sub gets behind you or something happens that you're just not able to continue, you have to start leaving, run away, then you're completely neutered. You don't have any capabilities. So they decided to change it around so that the attack submarines are going to be, front hunters, whereas American submarines will be more mid. However, they didn't mention anything about the consumable changes. About German submarines having the dive time consumable, whereas the American subs have the level consumable. Because if the American subs are getting closer, then their depth time, their depth charge, whatever, is going to be more at risk of being detected from radars, hydros, other ships, planes, whatever. And that could really be an issue, whereas the Germans were allowed to get in closer because they had that consumable, which could extend out their depth timer. So I wonder if they're going to address the consumables, but at the same time, I guess they just have to see how it pans out. And we'll see that. So the increase in depletion of dive capacity in update 0.10.8 had too much effect on the comfort of the game. It was very powerful, and the effectiveness of submarines and the addition of ASW for a large number of ships will further increase their effectiveness against submarines. Therefore, to make the detection of submarines a little less impactful to their gameplay, we've reduced the consumption of dive capacity for detected subs. So instead of losing it at 4 times rate, you lose it at 3, which is not that bad. So initially it was 2. You lose it at double rate if you're detected. Then they jacked it up to 4 times rate, which was like, oof. Which technically meant that a German sub could really bully the crap out of a US sub, assuming you don't die to torpedoes. If you can detect the US sub, you can just drain its dive time dry and shove it up to the surface. Anyway, details of that upcoming change can be found in this dev blog. We also changed the settings for submarine bots in co-op and training battles based on your feedback. Now AI-controlled submarines will take a more active part in combat. This will help avoid situations where a battle was unnecessarily prolonged due to having to hunt down a surviving submarine. Okay, cool. We will continue to monitor the combat effectiveness of both submarines themselves as well as the ships opposing them. If necessary, we will continue to make changes to their gameplay and characteristics. Sure. I did actually like the quad, the 4 times modifier to reduce the depth time meant that AI-controlled submarines could be pulled off the bottom of the water, much faster. They start with 6 minutes or whatever. And the bots weren't, super secret about what they did, so you'd often have them detected. You just wouldn't be able to interact with them. So it would just drain the dive time down completely, just gone. So with that being reduced, that might be an issue, but if they're changing the way the AI works to make them more surfaced or whatever, then it'll be more interactive. Feedback. Before getting into the details of the upcoming update, we would like to discuss your feedback regarding submarines. One of the most addressed points in your feedback was homing torpedoes. We understand that for some of you this may seem like an unusual mechanic, but with the changes that we made and the peculiarities of the submarine weapons, this mechanic can become a full-fledged and interesting part of the game. We created it taking into account how submarines acted in reality, tracking a target, determining its course to the point of impact. Of course, we had to adapt these things to our game conventions in order to give the opportunity to inflict significant damage, taking into account the small numbers of torpedoes in each salvo. With this, we tried to convey the atmosphere of naval operations on submarines as close to reality as possible within the framework of the game. We hope that in combination with the updated water world, you will be able to immerse yourself in that submarine feeling. Additionally, ships opposing a submarine have several ways to effectively counter this mechanic. One, the localization of a ping hit is displayed on your ship, which allows you to determine from which side the submarine is attacking and to try to minimize potential damage. Kind of like seeing shells coming in, you could, if I slow down, I'll juke these. If I speed up, I'll juke these. If I turn in, I'll miss. Because you can see the shells, so you can see the ping and try to determine, is there a threat? Where's the threat coming from? How would I mitigate the threat? Assuming you have the ability to. I mean, if you're being shot by 7 people at the same time, you're probably just dead. But if, you're in an isolated situation or a low pressure situation, it does give you the opportunity to mentally outplay or at least brace, for what could happen. 2, torpedoes stop homing at a particular distance from the target, and at the same time, the point of their homing is counted, considering the lead. Therefore, if you're heading toward torpedoes with your bow, the distance at which torpedoes stop homing increases, and the chances to evade increase as well. I'm going to read that again. Torpedoes stop homing at a particular distance from the target, and at the same time, the point of their homing is counted, considering the lead. Therefore, if you are headed toward torpedoes with your bow, the distance at which torpedoes stop homing increases, and the chances to evade increase as well. Let me kind of theory that one out for a second. Sorry, I guess I have to whatever this up. Give me the shapes, damn it. There we go. So, if your ship, there's a torpedo that's coming in, you have a ping here. Whatever. Here's the ping. Make it look pretty. It's not pretty. Then theoretically, if you have a dead zone around the ship of this, and your ship is moving forward, then the torpedoes, in order to hit this, will lose their homing. When they lose homing, they reduce their speed by 30%, which means mathematically, from this point to reach the hull interaction would probably end up being... Let me try and do this. Probably end up being... So the dead zone, still moving, whatever, here. So when crossing the dead zone, the torpedo is coming in on essentially this line. And this will move and probably have an interaction here, where it will dead out, and then it will kind of dead in or whatever to try to strike mid. Which is why, if the ping is forward, you can slam on the brakes. So what it's saying is, if you're moving forward, the interception point of like a torp that's coming in or something gets pushed even further forward because of the way it calculates this, so it actually dead zones out here to try to come in and get the strike, which is why you can turn out. Ooh. And have it juke. So the dead zone is relative to the ship. However, there's still a terminal attack run. And the terminal attack run is not guided. And the terminal attack run can be triggered outside of the dead zone? Interesting. Interesting. I'll have to think about that. Interesting. Okay, moving on. From update 0.10.10, almost all ships will have anti-submarine weapons, so there will be no need to fear that if a submarine makes a mistake, it will submerge without consequences. Okay. Another frequently cited point is the use of damage control party consumables to reset torpedo homing. We understand that for some of you this may seem counterintuitive, but so far we do not see a need for changes in this area. We see it as an opportunity for you to work with the damage control. In this case, you choose. Depending on the situation, what is better to do? Do you extinguish a fire? Do you stop flooding? Or do you get rid of torpedo homing? Moreover, the ping itself does not create an additional load on the damage control party, but only redistributes it. After all, if another ship were in place instead of the submarine, it could set you on fire with HE shells. Well, that's true. This is another layer of the game that needs to be taken into account in battle, which is easy to understand, but quite difficult to master perfectly. You need to choose the right moment to use the right consumable. For now, we want to continue testing the mechanics in their current form to look more closely at how this will interact with the other changes. At the same time, we remain open to your feedback, and if the current implementation does not work well enough, we'll think about how to improve or change it. So that's an interesting idea. Now, I had thought... Let's just cut this out, I guess. I had thought that, in terms of damage con, the damage con is used to reduce damage. Well, yeah, really, it's... What is the foremost reason to use a damage con? Damage con is going to get rid of a flood, which will enable you to move. Theoretically, your movement is going to claim a good map position or protect you from damage. So it reduces damage directly by making the flood not hurt you, and it reduces damage indirectly by allowing you to move and thus hopefully buffer the incoming damage. You could reduce fires, which could do, again, two things: reduce direct damage and also reduce increased detection, which probably doesn't matter very much outside of for destroyers, but still, there's a direct and an indirect reduction of damage directly tied to the consumable. And the ping is the same. The ping is attempting to reduce damage, either directly by having torpedoes that are about to strike your hull while you are double pinged, you damage con, which removes the citadel effect of the torps, depending on if that's where they're going to hit, and also stops any chance of setting a flood. So that directly reduces damage off the torpedoes, and it indirectly reduces damage by potentially fooling the torps out of the water so they can't track you, they can't line, they can't interact with you at all. Which is something that more happens in like submarine play, where the torps are coming in, you time it, you pop the damage con, you juke, you avoid damage entirely. So realistically, if damage control party is simply a damage reduction and damage mitigation factor, well, you mitigate fires, you mitigate floods, you mitigate torps. It's a mitigation tool. Well, but we want to mitigate more. We want to mitigate pings with an anti-ping thing, and we want to mitigate fires with an anti-fire thing. Sure, but you're also... It's a game where you die. You get shot until you're dead, and then you're dead. Nobody really wants to be dead, but you get shot until you're dead, so... And this is an interesting way to look at it, being that if it wasn't a sub out there, if it was two ships, so two ships hurling HE shells at you, as opposed to one ship hurling HE shells at you and a submarine throwing torpedoes at you, which really matters more? If a sub does roughly 7,000 damage to torpedo, what would a fire do? Against a 50,000 health ship, a fire that burns at max duration on a cruiser is what? $50,000 health ship times 3%? No. 0.3%. Right, 0.3% times, for a cruiser, 30 seconds. It's 4,500. Torpedo probably gets knocked down to a similar amount. Because if it's a 7,000 damage torpedo, not all of the damage is going to translate. It probably deals about 6,200. If it strikes into a torpedo protection zone at all, then that's going to reduce it further. So negating a torpedo is roughly the same as negating a fire. And potentially you're negating more damage off the torps than the fires. But then again, if you get quad fired, that would be 18,000 damage, which is a bitch. So if you get quad fired while your damage con is down, I mean, ultimately it comes down to, do you die by fire? Do you die by torps? How the fuck do you die? Wouldn't you like to not be dead? And not being dead is going to be about taking fights and choosing your positions. I mean, I'm not against the concept of the ping interacting with the damage control party, just, you know, how they're expressing it. And ultimately, it's going to be overloaded. It's going to have a lot of different things that it's going to have to account for, but that means you as a player are going to have to consider, what do you want to do it? Because, I mean, if you're thinking any times of coordinated play, clan battle, shit like that, when somebody's damage con gets popped, they get primaried, they get focused. Not to say that you wouldn't be shooting a non-primary target, but they get definitely primaried after they burn their damage con, because everybody with HE tries to just light that bitch on fire as much as possible. Again, you're going to have a focus target regardless, but that also means that if there's a ship that has a damage con down and a destroyer pops up, if the destroyer is not easily addressable, the destroyer is most likely trying to bait fire off of the wounded ship. In which case, the primary stays on the wounded ship, trying to light all the fires and get it killed. So, it's a thing that has to be taken into account. Ooh, this is especially weak right now. We really have to dogpile this. Anyway, okay, we're going to keep going. Often, there are proposals to change the format of battles from 12v12 and increase the number due to the addition of submarines. At the moment, we are not considering this possibility for various reasons. One of them, and the most important part, is an increase in the number of elements that you need to monitor. Sure. And the other is an increase in the load on both the server and your computers. Furthermore, a 12v12 battle already creates many events that have to be kept in mind if you want to have a successful match and lead your team to victory. An increase in the number of players, taking into account the specifics of our game, open water, and the ability to shoot from one part of the map to the opposite, will significantly complicate this task. At the moment, we would not want to resort to this situation and believe it will worsen the overall gameplay. There would also be more contacts and interactions in game that would have to be tracked if there were more players in battle. And lastly, increasing the number of total players would impact the influence you as an individual have on the battle results. In conclusion, we believe that this is not something the game needs right now. I mean, this is true for the first 4 to 5 minutes of a battle, because then people start dying, right? Then people start getting sunk. The less people that are alive, the less people are shooting at you. That's the normal course of the battle. You know, I think I described the early game, mid game, late game corresponds to how many enemies are still alive. Well, how many people are alive in general, but like early game is when it's 12v12, mid game is when it's 8v8, late game is when it's 4v4. Because there's so many things that have happened from the beginning to get to the middle, to get to the late, to get to the end, that it's just one giant, representation of how it's all unfolded. And when you ratchet it up to 13, 14, 15 v15, that's longer to get to 8 players left. And it also means that as you add more people in, it could be that taking shells from 3 ships is enough for you to survive long enough to get to your damage con, to get to your heal, to keep going, but it turns out that taking shit from 4 or 5 players is not, in which case somebody just gets alphaed off the field. Or it's more likely that they get alphaed off the field, and then they have to start interacting with armor mechanics and health mechanics and placement. Instead of having 3 flanks, do they break them up into 4 when you're deploying people? So ultimately, they don't want to fuck with the formula right now. At the moment, we would not want to resort to this solution and believe it would worsen the overall gameplay. So, I mean, I can go with this. I already recognized that there could absolutely be complications from adding more people to a battle, because the maps are designed under the concept of, it's a 12v12 or it's a certain situation with X amount of crossfire points, with X amount of spawn points, with X amount of blocking and safety and whatever. That realistically, if they did that, they might have to redesign a bunch of maps, and they may not have that ready. They may not have that throughput right now. And ultimately, if you're going to test something, don't change everything all at once. Don't change 7 different things and then try to figure out which one of them actually mattered the most. Change one at a time and then figure shit out. Granted, if we look up here, they're changing several things, so that's certainly a bunch of changes, but they have a limited amount of time in which to test, so it makes sense that they're, making changes as they make them because they're under a time pressure. Changing from 12 to 15, I don't know if there's necessarily a time pressure to that, and if they're already going to be interacting, they've got to start where you got to start. Anyway, we're going to continue. Some of you also mentioned that the introduction of submarines in the current format will reduce the number of gunfights between ships. This is true, but our game is developing, and new types of interactions between ships will appear. While there may be fewer targets to be fired at long and medium distances, this will add new interactions and a new layer of gameplay. For example, judging by test results, you enjoyed dropping depth charges. We believe that this will add another variable to battles and will make each game you play even more unique and provide new experiences that you will enjoy. Yeah, people like gunfighting. There are some people that's what they play for, that's what they like, that's the whole thing. And to be denied gunfights is to pull away from the thing, their interaction that really draws them to the game. So that's obviously a negative for them. But adding additional interactions does mean you'll have a wider and more varied experience because there's just more shit to do, more shit to deal with, more shit to experience, more stuff going on, more and different stuff going on. I think the concept about worrying about having less stuff to shoot at isn't that big of a deal. I also think people that are damage farmers that are concerned about, like, hey, the amount of damage I'm able to get is going to go down because, we might lose a battleship and gain a sub. And, like, that's a difference of 140,000 health in a game, tier 10 or something, being reduced to 8. So our damage totals are going to go down. And, people that PR farm and people that damage farm and stuff, that's going to change things. So I know there's some people that are really worried about that, but at the same time, the percentage of the player base that's really, like, locked in on PR, I believe is pretty appreciably small. I don't know if even most people in the game are aware that PR is a term. So, rented submarines in random battles 0.10.9. Submarine testing in ranked battles will continue in the 0.10.9 update. Currently, they prove themselves worthy in this type of battle. The upcoming changes will improve their gameplay, along with making it more comfortable to play against them. Submarines have taken a long time through numerous testing stages for both their closed and public tests in closed servers to taking part in ranked and co-op battles. We analyze thoroughly not just data obtained, but also feedback from you, trying to answer it in detail as well. There are plenty of changes made throughout all test iterations based on that exactly. The visual changes, mechanic reworking and improving, and balance adjustments. The last and certainly one of the most impactful changes we made based on your feedback was adding anti-submarine weaponry to nearly all surface ships. Now we come to a new and very important stage of testing. Submarines participating in random battles in update 0.10.9. Whoa. We would also like to share why we want to have such a test. We know that being transparent about our plans and reasons for changes is a critical part of your overall feedback, and we want to make sure we can continue to build a long and close relationship with you. The first reason is that random battles is the most popular battle type in the game. By adding submarines there, we will be able to assess their condition and to receive feedback from the largest number of players to decide what the next step should be. The next point is the 12v12 battle format. We have already tested submarines in ranked and co-op battles, but the 12v12 battle format changes the battle pace and its intensity significantly. That's true. Ultimately, while testing submarines, battles will unfold completely differently, bringing new tactics, maneuvers, and many other changes. Of course, it is important to limit the numbers of submarines in battle, and there will be no more than 2 per team for the initial 4 minutes of waiting for the first player in the queue, and no more than 4 submarines per team. Whoa! When waiting more than 4 minutes. Woo! 8 submarine battles. Whoa. Maybe if they'd done 3 as a hard cap, it would have been a little more palatable, but I think that's going to be surprising. Can you imagine a 4 submarine, 4 destroyer battle? Whoa. I mean, I guess it's not that hard to imagine. It basically already happens in ranked. Although I think ranked is hard limited to 2. We made this limit rather as a precaution to reduce the waiting time for players in the first days of the test, and do not expect such battles to occur frequently after the first few days of the test. The number of submarines will be mirrored for both teams. That's true, because they could absolutely, a whole bunch of people get the subs in their little container thing, and just like, you know, there's 1,000 subs waiting in random battles, and, you know, they will have to have 4 subs per team just to burn through it. But, I mean, they did mention this. We don't expect it to occur frequently after the first few days, because interest will wane. You know, it'll go back to just kind of people will just do what they're going to do. So the 1,000 subs in queue will probably resolve. And, you know, 2 days, 3 days, a week, or whatever after, it hopefully just kind of goes back to just being a normal thing. Introducing random rental submarines to random battles will allow more players to try them, get used to playing them, and, of course, develop tactics to counter them. A crucial consideration is that the submarines are a very unusual class, and we do not expect their popularity to be high. Roughly speaking, we're aiming at a 4 to 8% popularity at Tier 10. We'll be watching this metric very carefully and take action to keep popularity in that range. The distribution method for testing is also very important. Rental submarines of Tier 6, 8, and 10 will be available from random bundles from the Armory, just as for ranked battles. Is this a different rental method? The distribution is also very important. Will be available for random bundles from just as for ranked battles. The way this is described makes it sound like it's going to be a second thing that you click on. Like there's a rental for the sub or for randoms and then rental for ranked, as opposed to just having it all tied up under the same one. But it realistically it's probably just the same one. It just has a dual use. But anyway. This random distribution will allow us to carefully control the number of ships of the new class. I'm sorry. Sleepy. Will allow us to carefully control the number of ships of this new class, avoiding frustratingly long queue times. We will also take into account your feedback about having commander slots taken up by commanders left over after rental submarines disappear. Submarines will now be rented out without a commander. Sure. We completely understand the importance and seriousness of taking this step. We will analyze the presence of submarines in random battles, and we will act promptly if needed. We will do our best to keep you updated on the overall status and share any changes and tweaks we will be making throughout the testing period. We ask that you keep providing us with excellent feedback and help us make submarines a fully integrated part of World of Warships that we can all enjoy together. Woo! I didn't see this one coming. I did not expect submarines to be in random battles until like next year. You know, maybe patch 0.11.0. Hey, submarines or something. But to be fair, having submarines in a rental period, you know, be able to dip their toes into random battles and for people to get to have that experience for what amounts to about a month, roughly, is what a patch cycle. Because they could have it in 10.10 that they just remove the submarines out of random battles so they could analyze data. And they could. There's no reason why they couldn't. So, allowing people to dip their toes into random battles makes it, you know, it's kind of like getting into a pool, right? That's too cold. Just kind of like, yeah, you work your way into it. so that you can acclimate a little bit, as opposed to just like, congratulations, there's subs now. So I guess maybe this is part of the strategy, is just slowly getting them a little deeper on the server, getting them a little deeper in the server, getting a little further into the player base, getting a little further into the experience, I guess. Although I am a little confused. Okay, no. In update 0.10.9, we'll add ASW to battleships and cruisers. There was something here that said 0.10.10. From update 0.10.10, all ships will have... Yeah, so... Why is this? Maybe this is a typo? Maybe this is supposed to be 10.9? So I was like, wait a minute, are they putting subs in before people have the mechanics to strike back? When does 10.9 drop? Probably this Wednesday, if I had to guess.